Hello, it's Diana and Alex from BrandFirst, back with you today. We have returned from the Alternative Protein Show, which was an amazing experience. It was so good to see you all there.
Yeah, I just wanted to also mention that the show was really terrific because it's not the usual or the norm, as is usually the term, that you go to a show like this with this many experts, kind of a close-knit community that opened up to everyone. We were all talking with each other, sharing information. It's a very human experience, which is kind of funny because I think it was alluded to that when Robert Yeaman was mentioning that most all of us are communicating a lot on computers, through technology, but it's so very important to get into a room and kind of have a natural and organic thing happen. And guess what? Nobody was a jerk. In fact, everybody was really open and cool, and that is kind of the best case scenario which played out. We will be having new and different things to announce in these podcasts, especially as relates to the next show that's coming up in San Francisco next year. And it's going to kind of travel around the world, so we'll be dedicating some information to that at a later date. We're really excited to share with you the discussion that we had with Michael Lieberman from FOA and Son. Get ready. Michael Lieberman is the food and beverage practice leader at FOA and Son, an international insurance brokerage company. While it may sound a bit odd to have food and beverage division within an insurance brokerage firm, it is this type of specialization that distinguishes FOA and Son from others. The company was founded in 1861 and has operated from the belief that in order to build and negotiate appropriate risk solutions, there must be a deep understanding of the industries that they serve. Now in its fifth generation of family ownership, wow, that's a lot of family, the food and beverage practice at FOA and Sons is the fastest growing segment of their business. Before we start our discussion with Michael, just a word of caution. This is not going to be a light topic podcast. When talking about risks and what can go wrong, we can't escape the difficult, worst case scenarios. But that does not diminish the importance of our discussion today. There's so much positive momentum in the alternative protein space, and making sure that companies are prepared for negative events is the best way to ensure that upward trajectory that they are aiming for. Wasn't it Ben Franklin who said, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail"? How you doing, Michael?
I'm doing well. Good to talk to you.
Yes, thanks for joining us today, Michael. So, FOA and Son is a bronze sponsor of the show. And I was wondering if you could tell us how you got involved with the Alternative Protein Show in the first place.
Well, the All Protein Show was introduced to me by someone that may be very familiar to the alternative protein industry, and that's Melissa Ficina of City Shot. She and I have worked together on a number of accounts or companies where she has brought me in to do some risk management work. And a lot of those companies are in the alternative protein space. So she was really the one to introduce me to this show. But all along, our involvement in the alternative protein space, as a firm, we've been engaged in this area because of the tremendous growth that's going on, the opportunities in this space, the innovation in this space, and the need for a firm like us to be involved and analyze the risks that these companies face, that are in this highly innovative and high growth food space. So knowing that we'd be on the front lines, we got in early to provide our service to these brands.
Right. And you are international insurance broker since 1861, correct?
Yeah, we've been around a while.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us a little bit about what you do for listeners who may not know your company?
Sure. So again, we're an international insurance brokerage firm. So we represent our clients. We do not represent the insurance companies. We are here to advise and guide our clients, whether it's in the food space or another special sector that we deal in. We're here to advise and kind of guide them in risk management strategies, identifying risks, quantifying those risks, and ultimately negotiating the insurance contracts that will transfer those risks to insurance companies. Um, and outside of that, we also do loss prevention work. For companies who may have a manufacturing or processing facility, we'll go into those facilities and we'll help, reduce risk that could lead to worker injuries. From a food safety perspective, we have a number of food safety executives who will get involved to help put in place food safety plans to hopefully avoid situations like contamination or recalls. Um, so we take a very in-depth approach uh, to the insurance brokerage service that we provide.
Yeah, it sounds like a very hands-on and specific, way of dealing with all of the problems that come up for food companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of, let's call it perils that can impact a business. Whether it be from some type of natural disaster that impacts a facility where you can't operate, or some type of an event that disrupts a food supply chain and you can't get your hands on your raw ingredients that you need to produce your finished product. All the way to unfortunate situations where let's say there's a some type of pathogen in a product and consumers get sick. Of course, the first thing we're concerned about is consumer safety, but we also want to make sure that we do all that we can do to help protect our clients, protect the brand during a situation like that.
Mm-hmm. And being that you are, I know you have some clients that are in the plant-based industry. I'm sure those challenges are different from other food companies too.
Absolutely. I mean, the premise of FOA and Son as an insurance brokerage firm is that we have our areas of expertise. And that's usually divided down by industries, whether it's the food and beverage industry, fashion industry, pharmaceutical industry. We have specialists in each area. But when you look at the food and beverage industry, you have to further segment it to really dig into the unique risks that, let's say a frozen seafood supplier may face compared to that of a plant-based protein brand.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, you have to look at things differently. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a lot more, I would say, a lot more science reflected in this new industry where plant-based or cellular agriculture are really based upon certain advancements in being able to manipulate the materials necessary to actually create the structure for these alternative proteins that are coming to light. Are there any examples that you can give where, like, let's say a veggie burger, a company that's trying to produce using pulse crops, and something happens to their supply?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you look at something like a veggie burger, that may have, a very clean label, but it could have multiple ingredients, and one of those ingredients are impacted. It could result in a problem. And what you may see with a product like a veggie burger is that when it gets to the processing of that finished product, a lot of companies they'll partially cook it, because they don't want that veggie burger going home to the ultimate consumer, and then that consumer, microwaves it or puts it on the stove top. If it was cooked all the way at the processing facility, that veggie burger is going to taste like a hockey puck. So what
Right.
processors are doing is that they are partially cooking these items for quality purposes and for consumer satisfaction purposes. But that also leaves out a very vital kill step during the processing of that veggie burger, a kill step that could eliminate some harmful pathogens. So, there are certain risks involved with meeting customer demands, that may force you to look a little bit further up the supply chain to make sure that the ingredients that you're sourcing are free of pathogens, because you don't have that kill step. But yes, I mean, a huge recall impacting many, many companies, not just in the plant-based protein space, but in the food space in general, happened out of and it's a very well known, so I'll throw a name out there, but there's a company called CRF Frozen Foods, and they provided, corn and peas, all in frozen state that were then incorporated into finished goods. And unfortunately, it was found that that raw material had listeria, and the company actually had to recall 2 years worth of production. So just imagine the amount of finished products that were out there in the stream of commerce that were impacted. And I personally had one client that was impacted to the tune of $2 million worth of finished goods that had to be recalled out of the stream of commerce. Um, not a happy day, but with proper risk management, we were able to get through it, and the company is thriving.
Right. Well, I know. And speaking of food safety, I mean, there's been many, problems lately. I know right around Thanksgiving, the romaine lettuce crisis hit, right? And I know that a lot of people became sick. A lot of people became afraid to consume romaine. Clearly, there wasn't an indication really of where that had even come from. So I'm sure that many in the supply chain for romaine were impacted. And I can only imagine that insurance can only go so far in the protection that is provided in an event like that. Can you discuss some of the steps maybe companies can take to avoid a negative food safety event?
Right. I mean, the romaine issue was a tremendous impact to the romaine industry, but it was a huge impact to everyone in the supply chain. I mean, supermarkets having to pull that product off the shelves, restaurants having to adapt a new form of lettuce for their menu items. And let's face it, I mean, consumers were just afraid to eat any type of lettuce at that time. They steered clear of other types of lettuce, not just romaine. Um, but when you're really talking about, what I would call a food safety plan, I'll start with insurance because that's my area of expertise. And you did mention that insurance can only go so far. And you're right, insurance can only go so far. But what I will say is, especially dealing in the alternative protein space and getting involved with some of these brands at a very early stage in their success, what I have found is that many of these companies will have product liability insurance. And their main driving force of buying product liability insurance is not because they love to buy insurance. Uh, it, it's because that their customers, whether it's a Whole Foods or someone else along those lines, their customers require them to have product liability insurance. So they buy it. And that's the right move for them to buy it.
Mhm.
But what happens is that the executive, the food executive at that brand, they believe that, hey, I have this product liability insurance. That must mean that I'm now protected or covered for a recall scenario. And that is just not the case. Liability insurance, very basically, its primary function is to protect a brand from claims of bodily injury. Someone consumes your product, they get sick, they sue you. That's where product liability insurance comes into play. But in any food safety or a recall situation, a brand or a company, they hope to catch those situations well before anyone gets sick. Through product testing. Hey, we tested our product. We found that it has something that could make people sick, whether it's salmonella, E. coli, or listeria, and they pull that product out of the marketplace. And that can have a huge impact on their brand, right? Their reputation. It can have a huge impact on their customer relationship. It can have a huge impact on sales.
Oh, yeah.
But
Hmm.
any of those impacts are not covered by liability insurance. So, it's really, when looking at the entire risk, that's where you have to kind of bring in a more holistic approach and incorporate a well designed product contamination recall policy that will cover things like the loss of your profits after a recall event, the value of the product that you have to destroy following a recall event,
Hmm.
the testing, the recall expenses. You may have customers claiming against you, against the brand for their loss of gross profits. The only way to kind of capture all of those risks is to put in place a very well designed product contamination, product recall policy.
Yeah. This morning, For example, as I had a bag of mini avocados, I recalled that I needed to wash them because of a listeria scare that's going on right now. Um, but that's a product that's grown, harvested, and picked and then sent out to grocery stores or food,
Retailers,
retailers and food service. When you are talking about some of these companies, errors in manufacturing processes do occur. So there's two different facets. There's the supply, and then there's those that are kind of constructivists that are creating something, which, like you were mentioning earlier, with a veggie burger. Are you offering these different tiers of risk assessment and control and insurance for both suppliers and manufacturers?
Absolutely. And whether you're a supplier or a manufacturer, or whether you're a brand that's dealing with a co-packer. And I think, for this audience, the alternative protein audience, we are seeing so many of these brands rely on a co-packer, a co-man business model. And that's probably the proper business model, just from a capital standpoint, not to invest your capital dollars in the maintenance and startup of a processing facility if you can find someone who's established and can process your product well for you. But yeah, a lot of these co-packers, what you'll find is, they have contracts that protect them. So brands need to be careful of that. They need to understand who their co-packer is. They need to understand that co-packer's experience. They have to understand where, if there is an error in the manufacturing process, let's say a co-packer unfortunately did not sanitize their facility well enough, and listeria started to brew on food contact surfaces. And now a brand puts their image in the hands of that co-packer, and that co-packer is putting out product that could potentially be contaminated with listeria. A brand really needs to take a step back and look at that worst case scenario and say, how am I, let's think that insurance doesn't exist. If I didn't have my own insurance policy to cover me, how could I get some form of protection through my co-packer who's at fault for introducing this listeria? So, going back to what you said, Diana, about insurance not taking you, it can only go so far. What I like to do is kind of create, let's call it a food safety dream team. And that can be made up of food safety experts. And for many of these brands, it requires bringing someone in from the outside. Um, like I said, my introduction into the alternative protein show was through Melissa Ficina at City Shot. She's unbelievable from an operational standpoint, and she's helped many of my clients build food safety programs. But also, bringing in the right attorneys who understand the food business, the right attorneys who can look at contracts that you enter, that a brand enters with their co-packers, just to see, hey, where are we exposed, and how can we get more protection through this co-manufacturing agreement? Really looking at those hold harmless agreements and figuring out how we can build those agreements uh, to put our clients in a better position to make sure that they're protected if and when a loss were to occur.
Right. And what about, for instance, like labeling, right? Because I know there's definitely some risks associated with how some of the alternative proteins are labeled in the marketplace, being that it's such a new industry.
Absolutely. We've seen so much activity in this space. And I would say that, when it comes to labeling, insurance probably plays a much more minor role in managing that risk, because this is one of those situations where insurance can, again, only go so far. So when I'm working with a client on the exposures related to labeling, I really stress bringing in the right attorneys to look at those labels, to vet those labels, and to identify the potential liabilities. I mean, any company out there needs to be very careful with labeling, whether it's, a claim that they're making on their labels about being heart healthy or all natural, or even something as simple as having the right nutritional facts labeling. Companies need to have their labels thoroughly vetted. Um, But what we've seen recently, uh, as the alternative protein, plant-based, cultured meat industries really gain steam and gain tremendous market share, is that these companies, in some ways, they have a little bit of a bullseye on their back, from what I would classify as these frivolous lawsuits. One of the more recent suits that many in this audience in this industry are probably well aware of, and I'm not going to name names, but it's a company who's based out in San Francisco. Um, the company produces a plant-based, dairy-free cheese and butter products. But in a recent suit against this company, the plaintiff alleged that the company, by calling their product butter, is and this is a quote from the actual lawsuit, that they are basking in the glory of the dairy industry
Oh my God.
by
Yeah.
by using terms like butter that invoke some type of positive health benefit only found in dairy products.
Right. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, because there really does need to be some kind of familiarity when it comes to communicating a product to consumers, right? I mean, how else are you going to explain what a product is? I mean, and I'm sure it's labeled right on there, vegan or plant-based, clearly. So,
It absolutely is labeled clearly. I mean, that's their competitive angle.
Yeah.
It's to separate themselves from dairy.
mhm.
But again, when whether it be a lawyer just looking to shake someone down, or whether it's big industry recognizing that their market share is at risk, brands need to expect that these types of frivolous lawsuits can come their way, and at the end of the day, it may result in zero payout, but it's an obstacle, and it can take their eye off the goal, and maybe that's what the point of these lawsuits are.
Well, I'm not going to name names, but sometimes when you taste something, you say, I cannot believe it's not butter. And frankly, the margarine industry, when it kind of came to a head, I would say through the 70s, it was something that was used for quite another thing than food, and then became a staple. And I mean, I remember putting margarine on matzo crackers and didn't know the difference between it and butter, except that it was maybe supposed to be better for you. I don't remember, and of course, as a child, you're not reading, things about lawsuits, etc. I don't know if there was a lot of, similar echoes back then.
You know what? You bring up a very good point. I do not recall if there were similar lawsuits. But again, I mean, I think we just live in a society that is so, litigious, and it's just continuing down that path, that, these are definitely here to stay for a while. And look, companies just need to be prepared that this may come, to make sure that their labels are correct, know that they may have to put up a fight. They need to make sure that they have the right law firm, on hand to, number one, help with the label review process to begin, because that will at least minimize the risk that there's going to be some type of lawsuit coming. But if there is a lawsuit, that they can jump on this right away, and make sure it goes away. So yeah, it's a big issue right now.
Right, especially when some more of these technologically advanced applications with food, you're breaking through barriers that are new, and as a result, the complexity of how you can upset rules, from somebody feeling like, oh well, I thought I was eating an actual hamburger, to, oh, I thought I was drinking, milk, and does it have almonds? How many almonds does it have in it? There's so much room for that litigious, kind of conditioning that we've gone through in this time, in this 10-year of lawsuits. And it seems like the level of, it's heightened how they're going after companies for really, some frivolity, and some just simply creating an illusion of being the same, and that feeling that maybe there's something wrong and not informing the public of what they're really, eating.
Yeah, I mean, look, the milk, you mentioned the milk debate, and to me that is just so ridiculous. But these things are happening. It makes for very good comedy every now and then.
Right.
But when you're the brand involved in these lawsuits, there's nothing funny about
Right.
it.
I was just gonna say, except when you're the brand. Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, even I was on a little shopping excursion over to Trader Joe's the other day, and I was looking for eggnog. Tis the season, right?
Yeah.
To have
Yep.
some eggnog. But I was looking for an almond version of eggnog, and I found it. Now I forget if they actually called it almond eggnog. I'm not quite sure, but right next to it was the milk section, and I saw the almond milk, but the Trader Joe's carton didn't say milk; it said almond beverage.
Oh.
I mean,
Mm.
I think what you're seeing here is that some of these more well-established, supermarkets who have their private label programs, they're just trying to avoid these lawsuits to begin with. They have nothing to gain by debating whether or not it's a beverage or milk or MYLK or
Oh, right.
MILK. They're just steering clear. But again, if you're the brand, um, you know, I guess, kind of steering into the storm sometimes can be a good thing. Um, but you have to be ready for it. You have to be ready to, put up a fight and put some, perhaps put some dollars on the line, and understand what insurance can do and what insurance can't do.
Right.
Right.
Um,
It's interesting because I think that this is like, so I know that you're an international company. So again, we're not going to name names, but I got into a conversation with a company that's from Austria, and I'm sorry, they're from Australia.
Close.
Yeah. Well, sometimes one can be confused between Down Under and Lederhausen.
That's right.
Anyway, and they have an oat beverage. So they came up against literally their country's practice of farming, of milk and dairy, and the lobby that has such power that they were essentially nullified in their ability to even try workarounds to sell their oat beverage, which I thought was interesting because I don't think you have the same problem in America just yet, even though there are people there's very powerful lobbies, food lobbies. For example, the lawsuit between Just for their Just Mayo, but we have remedies. Part of those remedies have to do with also people balancing risk and having a good law firm to represent what it is that you're trying to do and launch it as a product. This company, just by like state law, was just told no, 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 and very, very different though.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I hope we don't get to that point, and I don't think we will. Um, you know, uh,
Mm.
but yeah, it makes for a very interesting battle when you get brought into this. And unfortunately, when you get into these types of lawsuits, sometimes you put your marketing efforts and your sales efforts on the back burner, and you have to really put resources into handling these claims. Um, Again, a well vetted, risk management plan surrounding labeling, really puts you in the best position to handle these things.
Right. It's kind of like, do you want to take the industry by storm or err on the side of caution? So finding that balance, I suppose.
That's up to the brand and up to the investors.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
But again, I've heard from some investors in this space that they like to, again, I'll use the phrase, kind of, you know, steer right into the storm, because it elevates the brand image in the press. You get more press, and perhaps you get more sales. So the increase in sales will pay for the lawsuit, I guess,
Mm.
for the first year.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully, right?
Hopefully.
And Michael, you had mentioned something that I thought was very interesting in a previous conversation regarding VC firms and the connection between being prepared for courting them and becoming, attached at the hip.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the alternative protein space, we are seeing so much money flowing through, which is a great thing, right? It's definitely something that should be celebrated. But what I have found is that there are some VC firms that will do a pretty heavy amount of due diligence on their own to make sure that the common risks that could impact an alternative food, alternative plant-based protein company, whatever those risks are being taken care of, through risk strategies or through um, the proper insurance design. But on the other hand, I know that there are some VC firms that will simply, I guess, believe that the brand is taking care of these things, that they have the proper risk management in place, that they have the proper insurance in place. And what can happen is, when you have these investors pouring money into these companies, and if there was ever a negative event, let's say some type of food safety issue or inventory sitting in a warehouse that was temperature sensitive suffered a change of temperature and you lost $1 million or $2 million worth of product due to that change of temperature. And that brand comes to find out that they didn't have insurance for that, and they have to report back to their board and their investors what happened. In situations like that, the directors and officers need to be careful because they can be held personally liable for their actions or lack of action to procure proper insurance. That would fall under a directors and officers lawsuit. So look, insurance plays a vital role in these brands as they relate to their investors and the VC firms. And it can really become a competitive advantage, if the brand is trying to court investors, to be able to have a fluid conversation about what risk management strategies that they have implemented in the case of a negative event. Um, and I'm not trying to be a pessimist. I'm forever an optimist, but you have to be prepared for these events. And if you're not prepared, you may not shine as bright to all the VC firms that are out there. I mean, I've seen risk management strategies even separate one brand from another brand in a competitive environment when they're trying to court customers,
Mm.
to be able to say to a customer, hey, here's what we've done just in case something were to go wrong. Here's what we've done from a risk management strategy. Here's the insurance that we have to back us and to back you, our customer. I mean, uh, it can really provide a great assistance in any type of relationship, whether it's a customer or whether it's an investor.
Right.
Right. You're approaching risk with tools, and you really have a lot to give, in the way of information to some of these new companies for sure.
Absolutely, and we are here to serve and here to help, and really excited to see what the next 5 years look like in this space.
Yeah, it's a labor of love when the challenge is so great to try to help a company come to a place where they're properly bringing themselves to market, and that's through insurance, through risk management, it's through branding, it's through design, it's through legal. There's so many different facets that need to kind of be accumulated and adjusted accordingly, especially in this new field.
Absolutely, and this may sound a little bit backwards, but if brands can see how insurance or anything that they do, they should try to find how are we doing this to make it a competitive advantage for us.
Right.
And risk management and insurance can absolutely be used as a competitive advantage. You just have to look for that silver lining, and be willing to be open minded about it, uh, and know how to communicate that to, again, whether it's your investor or your customers. It can really help in many situations.
Yep.
I know we were talking a little bit about ingredients, before. And some of the products in this space have multiple ingredients, right? I mean, it's a complex industry. So, how can brands really prepare and protect themselves from, say, one ingredient causing a total shutdown of their supply chain?
When I look at supply chain, I look at ingredient sourcing, you kind of have to break things up. Some brands will do their own sourcing,
Mm-hmm.
um, while some brands rely on a co-manufacturer to source those raw ingredients. And whatever the case may be, I mean, the brand itself needs to ensure that the proper ingredient supplier vetting is taking place. And this includes, looking at their food safety certifications, looking at how the product is tested, not only at the source, but maybe doing some additional product testing, when that raw ingredient makes its way to wherever the finished product is going to be manufactured, and also doing supplier audits. Whenever I talk to my clients about a food safety event, I always bring it to a worst case scenario because that kind of brings it alive, right? Hey, let's imagine that you had a situation and potentially consumers got injured, and now you have a news outlet that puts a microphone in your face and says, hey, as the brand selling this product, what did you do from a food safety standpoint? You want to make sure that you can say that you take food safety very seriously and prove it. And doing supplier audits, and again, these brands don't have the bandwidth in house to do it themselves, but there's so many good third-party auditing agencies out there, who can go in and perform this service for you. Putting good supplier qualification criteria in place, doing all these things will hopefully minimize the possibility of any type of negative event from occurring. Um, Another thing is, you want to, when it comes to, raw ingredients, you want to ensure good product traceability. Uh, you want to ensure that traceability all the way up the supply chain for each ingredient. And there's so many, talk about technological advancements. There's so many advancements in this space being made to help with this, such as blockchain technology. We hear about that all the time. But one basic way of minimizing exposures is to keep, inbound lots of raw materials separated. I've seen situations, and I've been involved in situations where the same ingredient, let's call it tapioca flour, is being sourced, but due to demand, you have to source tapioca flour from multiple vendors. Um, and then once at the processing facility, what happens is you take all those different lots from different vendors, and the co-packer or co-manufacturer is co-mingling that raw ingredient. And the problem with that is now if you have an issue, if your finished good tests positive for, some type of pathogen that's linked back to potentially tapioca flour, but you've incorporated all of the different vendors' tapioca flour into one lot, you're looking at a massive recall rather than a very narrow scope recall. So it's a very, blockchain is, I think everyone's still trying to wrap their head around blockchain, but there are just so many simple fixes out there to minimize a total shutdown of your supply chain from some, negative event impacting a raw ingredient. But again, even the best laid plans can fail. But once we put all these measures in place and we've minimized the risk, that's really where, a properly designed insurance program can come in and provide that financial backstop to all of this. And I think that's a problem that I've seen in the insurance business. A lot of insurance brokers will lead with insurance instead of leading with loss mitigation and loss prevention. I think you need to start with loss prevention and minimizing exposures.
It,
And once you cross that bridge, then you can incorporate the right type of insurance design. And what you'll get is great coverage at the lowest possible price for that coverage. Um,
Right.
it's interesting, Michael, because when you're talking about this, you mentioned blockchain. That is, something that it really is ever evolving. I think initially, obviously, the first time I heard about it was relevant to Bitcoin, but then, subsequently, we've gone to a couple symposiums where there have been experts talking about blockchain and food, and it's very interesting. We've also heard a lot about food waste and how there's new artificial intelligence programs that people have come up with to measure down to the minutia, exactly what's going on in the chain of throwing things away and wasting food to try to solve for that problem. But a lot of the companies that we're going to see at the Alternative Protein Show, some of them are larger, some of them are smaller. I guess if I were a smaller company that had, whether it was cellular, agriculture, or plant based, regardless, let's say we're really honing in on the science of what we're doing and we're ready to release something. At what point would I reach out to FOA and Son to start to get a hold of the manufacturing process that I haven't even gotten yet? Let's just say the apparatus for the right co-packer. But when would we knock on your door?
I mean, look, we always suggest get in touch with us as early as possible in the process. The application of the insurance policy may not take place for months, but you want to start developing your, let's call it your risk management strategy well before you release your product. And also getting in touch with us sooner rather than later, it gives us much more time to tell the story of what that brand is doing and the innovation that they're bringing to the food space. It gives us so much more time to have discussions with underwriters, to get underwriters to feel comfortable about the risk, and sign on to this. I mean, look, you have to understand, underwriters, they like to underwrite proven models. So when we talk about innovation, innovation is great, but innovation is also very scary to insurance underwriters who are, on the hook if something were to go wrong. So to engage us early on in the process, to allow us to come in and brainstorm about identifying potential risks, quantifying those risks, and then putting measures in place to lessen the probability of those risks negatively impacting your business. That's the story. That's the story that we want to be able to sit down with an underwriter and say, hey, let's talk about this, you know, let's call it a new cultured meat, cell-based meat company. I mean, if I just throw in an application to an underwriter that talks about cell-based meat, they're going to freak out. But if I go with that full story to talk about how this is developed, what's being done, how the process is being monitored, it's a totally different dialogue. So the earlier, the better.
Yeah, it is definitely a different dialogue when it gets to new science and food, for sure. And frankly, if you're going to find an underwriter that's interested, the level of their understanding of that process is so important because they're not going to insure something they don't understand.
Absolutely. And for the most part, a lot of these companies are on the smaller side. So, you know, money matters, and any of these companies, the premium that they're going to produce, it's not going to be an overwhelmingly high premium. So underwriters are more, uh, you know, I guess, maybe they won't take the risk as seriously. So it requires a much different approach to really make the underwriters honestly feel like that they're part of this movement, right? And that's what we're trying to do with our underwriters that we bring this business to, that this is the future of food. And we want these underwriters to play a vital role. And we're telling the stories of these brands and what they're doing. And we're working with our team of, our food safety dream team, whether it's someone like, Melissa Ficina. I've been mentioning attorneys all day, but, Hillary Hughes, of GSB Law, she does a ton of work in this space to be able to go to underwriters with the operational expertise and to go to underwriters with the contracts that are in place to protect these brands, and then say, hey, let's get the proper insurance in place so this company can thrive. Underwriters are far more warm towards that conversation than just slapping an application in front of them and crossing your fingers and hoping for the best.
Right. And we do the same thing too when it comes to branding and understanding, a client's business. It's something that we need a holistic perspective on before we even, begin a project. So completely understandable.
Absolutely. I mean, too many brokers, in my field, the insurance industry, they don't start with the risk identification process. Now, you have to first identify what can possibly go wrong. How can we potentially minimize those risks? Without doing that, you really can't build the right type of risk transfer mechanism. You can't build the right type of insurance contract. So it's a vital first step, and it's one that we practice here at FOA and Son every single day.
Right. You have to anticipate, and part of your ability to do that is, twofold. It's your experience, and it's also your will to disseminate the risks and understand the environment and the specifics with regards to new clientele when you're going to find somebody to underwrite in the first place. There's a lot of work involved.
There's a lot of work, but again, it's a passion for us. The food industry, what's going on in this sector is very exciting, and we're honored to be on the front lines, to see what's taking place and to play a role in the success of these companies.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
we find it pretty amazing, and it's fulfilling work for us.
It is for us too, for sure.
So, Michael, I know that we didn't get a chance to see you at the show because you had other things you had to take care of, but we did meet with your colleagues, Sal Fazzoleri and Bradley Hamburger, which was really cool.
Very nice to meet them. Hopefully next time we can meet you.
Hey, at least I got some time on this podcast with you guys, so I appreciate it.
That's right.
Oh, likewise.
Yes.
Great meeting you, and looking forward to the future of food.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Michael.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Take care.
So once again, that was Michael Lieberman from FOA and Son. You can learn more at foason.com. That's F as in Frank, OASON.com. And in closing, I just wanted to say it truly was a pleasure to meet everyone at the Alternative Protein Show. It was a tremendous event with amazing energy, and it was just so interesting to learn about all the different facets of the business. And I have to say that the future of food is looking very promising. And we will continue to have podcasts, so stay tuned for our 6th podcast, which will be coming out shortly. In the meantime, you can learn more about us. Again, this is Diana Rogers and Alexander Zox from BrandFirst at brandfirstnj.com. Stay tuned.